Welcome to the Awaken to Wholeness Summit. I'm Val Solidker. We are about to get deep with a woman who has been claimed by mystery, and she lives her gifts as a guide for others. Kerry Brady. Kerry is a deep ecologist, just like me, who focuses on supporting the shift in consciousness needed to create a truly regenerative culture for people and the planet. She's the co-founder and director of Ecology of Awakening, which offers programs that facilitate individual and collective awakening beyond the story of separation into the realization of our inherent place within the larger unfolding web of life. Kerry has more than 25 years of experience in transformational modalities, including non-dual wisdom approaches, psychotherapy, somatic experiencing, trauma work, deep ecology, permaculture, nature-based retreats, and vision quests. Through an intimate knowing of what it is to let go into uncharted territory, she brings a distinctly grounded approach to guiding individuals and groups into a more adaptive and responsive way of belonging to the world. Kerry, it is so incredibly awesome to have you here.
It's thrilling to be here and really looking at what you've put together and all the people you've called forward, especially in this moment. So thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. You know, I feel like I'm really excited to have you, especially because we speak the same language. I mean, deep ecology, cosmology, you know, coming into this new story, our intimacy with Earth and cosmos, it's everything. It's everything. First of all, it's everything. And second of all, it's everything that informs all the work that I do as well. You know, everything comes from that space. It's all, that's kind of the fertile ground from which it all springs, whatever form of service it looks like. And I know you're living the same life. You're living that life as well.
And it can look really out there and sound very heady to a lot of people. So hopefully as we talk, we'll unpack more about how it's relevant, what that looks like for each of us, what it looks like for the collective, and begin to kind of taste it.
Yeah, absolutely. And why don't we just start there? Because, you know, deep ecology is not necessarily a term that we throw around every day. So why don't we start by, you know, taking a look at the work that you do, describing it a little bit, bring us in.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it all starts for me in really looking at this momentous time we're in on the planet, like on every level, politically, ecologically, institutionally, socially. You know, it's like if we're going to create truly regenerative cultures for people and the planet, all of those realms need to shift. So really looking at, we need all the work. We need permaculture, saving seeds, climate action, social justice, you know, all of the actions are super important. And in my view, if we're not simultaneously looking at the mindset of what got us into this mess and really shifting the lens of how we move forward, then we're missing a huge piece of the work. So for me, it really all starts with story, really looking at cosmology and what's the worldview that defines who we are. I mean, really looking at cosmologies and worldview in general, it's like they give an overarching umbrella for really what the beliefs are that any culture holds. So our values come out of that, our actions come out of it. It defines where we came from, who we are, how we belong. And if you look at the story of the story that we inherited in modern industrial culture, it's a really interesting one, right? Where it's like we're skin encapsulated egos. We're separate from the earth. The earth and the planet are solely here for our resource. And spirit and the divine is like out there. The material world and earth and everything in form is inanimate. Yeah. So it sets up a really interesting journey in terms of the impact of that. I mean, just the place of the incredible disconnection from nature in here, nature in ourselves, who we are, the soul loss that we see in so many places, and nature out there, just the rhythm, our own rhythm of the earth and the rhythm of how we move. And if we continue to see earth and ecosystems as separate, then it's like we don't have to be bothered by what's happening. in terms of the mass extinctions and oceans being polluted and climate chaos. And it's easier to just disregard it. And
absolutely. When we see it as instruments, when we see ourselves as separate, it's not, when we don't understand that it's part of our larger body, it's easy to use it and abuse it because it feels like it's not anything that's going to affect us.
right.
Right. So when we think about this, this environmental crisis, we tend to talk about it like that. It's really more, like you're saying, a crisis of perception with
Yeah.
how we view ourselves and our relationship to life, our relationship to time, our relationship to everything.
Our fundamental life support system, right, where it's withering, and not only our life support system, but just all the beings that have every right to be here, just like we do. So
Yeah.
Thomas Berry, who wrote the book, The Universe Story with Brian Swim, who I hope you'll have on your program, he has a great quote. I mean, not a great quote, but he's saying, you can't have a healthy human on a sick planet. So we're wondering why we're disoriented and diseased. And so for me, and like you, story frames the whole thing. And if we're not looking at that, it's a little bit like moving around the deck chairs on the Titanic. There's this whole elephant that we're not really looking at. And more people are really talking about it these days. So it really starts there for me, really looking at, we're stuck in a deeply set anthropocentric framework, like human-centered. It's like green wallpaper out there that sets the background for all of our human endeavors. And we're not going to make it much further. I mean, we're getting massive feedback from the bigger system that things need to change. So my work is really about how do we facilitate the shift in consciousness from the mindset that comes with modern industrial culture and everything that entails, because there's lots of different layers in there, to a lived recognition of being an inherent part of 14 billion years of unfolding. It's there's so much possibility when you open up to that. And if you go from a dead universe that's kind of meaningless and we're just doing our thing in a consumerist way to, wow, we're in a living universe that's continuously unfolding through us and around us, it invites a whole different level of participation and ways to engage, and people need and want a sense of meaning and purpose and kind of role to play.
Yes, absolutely. It's almost amazing that we don't allow ourselves to get the connection of this unfolding, this billion years unfolding, and how we are part of something so much larger. We get caught up. It's like the universe hasn't been evolving for all these billions of years for us to be consumers and get caught up in the story within a story within a story. And we're fighting to stay attached to that story. And anything else outside of that feels uncomfortable in some way. But it's the most natural thing in the world because it is what we are.
And it shows you the level of conditioning and just how deeply ingrained our patterns are.
Absolutely.
And to a large degree, it's like, it's not our fault. Look what shaped us. We've been shaped by that story. So really the shift I'm talking about is not an overnight process. And how do we set up containers and supports and processes and, people doing so many different ways of engaging with this new story and the cosmology to support a shift that isn't going to happen overnight, but needs to take place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned Thomas Berry, and I have another quote from him that speaks to this exactly. He says, the deepest crises experienced by any society are those moments of change when the story becomes inadequate for meeting the survival demands of a present situation.
Here we are.
It's like we are right here on the edge, and it's like we have to start listening or we die.
Yeah.
The evolution is, it's like this greatest amount of pressure where you either evolve or die. And we're on it. We're in it. It's right now. This is happening. We're looking around at all the devastation in our inner world, in our outer world, and we're being called to, wake up, to use
Absolutely.
wake up and pay attention, because there is something so much deeper going on here.
Yeah. And I think what we can get into is the level of it being directly affecting ecology and our life system. And then another one that's more the heart of my kind of orientation to this work around when we really engaged with the living universe story and really feel into what that means for each one of us, it has the potential of really shifting our whole way of moving through the world, like on a day-to-day basis, kind of where we go for guidance and how we move. And so this whole, I have to stick in this one piece because I always love it. My sweetie is named Brock Dolman, and he's an ecologist and naturalist and permaculture teacher. He talks about ecosystem restoration and how, it's a complete necessity. We need to completely restore and regenerate and hydrate our landscapes. But in order to do ecosystem restoration, we have to do ecosystem restoration. So I always love that. It's become the sort of cool term, as he's a hunting linguist, around how do we restore ourselves back into the very system that birthed us and get beyond our hubris that we're the more intelligent beings living here.
Yeah, and that everything is here to support our proliferation, our population growth, all of it.
Yeah.
Often we hear about them saying, scientists, people saying that, the earth can hold this many billions of people and more. And it's like, no. We forget to consider that there's other species being displaced.
Yeah.
That the land that we take creates a mass extinction, and is like we are in the midst of a mass extinction that we haven't seen in, 50 million years. Like we're in it. We lose 50 to 100 species a day. It's significant what's happening right now. And this is not, mainstream news, and it needs to be mainstream news. We're all caught up in gossipy, Hollywood and all these things.
Or simple survival pieces, just making it in our everyday lives, and the people that are disfranchised. I mean, how do you take that kind of information in? It's a big one.
It is a big one. And I think it's hard for a lot of us to do that we don't want to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Sometimes people will be like, don't tell me, I don't want to know, because knowing makes me then responsible to make a choice.
Exactly.
So we kind of, I think we have a giant collective hand in some ways, not really wanting to go there and look deeper into the shifts that need to happen right now.
Well, at some point we may talk about more of the rite of passage that it feels like we're all being forced into, and there's lots of different layers to that. It might come later when we talk, but it's a critical piece, and for sure it pushes us beyond our comfort zone.
And we will
really, like heels in the ground.
Oh yeah, no question. So what brought you into this work in the first place? Like how did your life unfold in such a way that you were just claimed and you knew this is it, your service, your life work, everything calling to you?
It's been unfolding for 30 years. So my work now, especially through Ecology Awakening, really stems from my own journey and really what supported me. I had many, many years of feeling completely disconnected and just not getting what we were all doing here. I didn't get the agenda of kind of what we were supposed to be doing in terms of making a more successful, secure life. I just couldn't get on board with it. And I ended up getting more into psychology and then guiding vision quests, and really found meaningful work in those two avenues. And it was beautiful. And then really when I met Brian Swim, who, again, we've mentioned, universe story,
yes.
Really everything changed. It validated something in me that helped me to get that it's not a pathological thing, that something wrong with me that I can't get on board with what we're supposedly supposed to be doing. But it, something in really getting the universe story and all that he conveys in it became this kind of holding for me in terms of arriving and suddenly belonging. And that sounds like nice and poetic, but there was a really big shift in terms of really being able to leave and step outside of the worldview I grew up in.
Yeah.
That just didn't make sense. And to feel like there was something being called from me. And so personally, it had a big impact in terms of how I connected with everything and what kind of gave me meaning. And then professionally, there was a big part too. And Brian and I have for over a decade taught a course through the California Institute of Integral Studies called Nature and Eros. And it's been incredible to just watch what's happened over those 12 years and how much that work has just entered me, and that it's taken a decade or two since first meeting him to really land where I'm landing now. And the process continues. Like I'm, forever going to be decolonizing myself from the old worldview and stepping more and more into this. And then professionally, it really shifted things in terms of, like, specifically with guiding vision quests. It was a beautiful process, and people would have incredible moments of discovering their place or seeing what their particular role was, or really belonging to the earth for the first time. But still there was a way where it was about working in a single psyche. It was still about people's personal lives.
Yeah.
When I met Brian and really started looking at the bigger story, it shifted everything in terms of, wow, there's like a collective case of mistaken identity here. And we can't just go around and keep trying to fix a broken self into a broken world. So it took time, but over the next decade, there were lots of other things that came in terms of living systems and permaculture and the somatic experiencing trauma work, with resiliency work that you named, and non-dual wisdom, and all these things came together with rites of passage and with the cosmology, and the end result is ecology of awakening, which I can talk more about later. But it started as a year-long program, really looking at, okay, this is not an overnight process. How do we create containers that will really help the reshaping? And now there's some other smaller programs, but really what I realized a couple of years into guiding that program is it contains everything I would have wanted in moving through that space between stories, in shifting out of one worldview and kind of deepening into what it is to be a part of this 14 billion year creative unfolding. So it continues, and it's work that I really love, but it contains all these different parts that really stem from my own journey, and really around that piece that the space between stories. Thomas Berry, the historian and theologian that you've mentioned too, he and Charles Eisenstein both use that term, the space between stories, and it's so apt. It's like when we start to go through this process of really shedding what's shaped us, it can be really disorienting. And I found myself there for years, like really not sure where to orient to. So, yeah, anyway, I try to hold all the different components of what I would have wanted to both provide the context and to have the tools and processes to help people deepen through that transformation.
Beautiful. And it is such a powerful, sort of a powerfully poetic disorientation,
Yeah.
Positive disintegration, where we're like letting go of everything that we thought was our world and our story and our framework for living, and not attaching to anything in that moment, just letting go.
Yeah.
Right. And allowing the images to come through us, allowing a new story to be birthed within us about who we are and how we're showing up and what's happening around us. And that, from that deeper place, comes this cosmological awareness, this cosmological intelligence, this great mystery.
And it's it's easy to, like, it's beautiful what you're saying. And what I found is when people don't have the right context for really what's happening, whether it's a sudden waking up or, slowly through time, and don't have the support in terms of how to move through that, it can be really, people can pathologize themselves, kind of like I did.
Absolutely.
But it's so all the more reason, like, these conversations need to happen. Brian talks constantly about membranes in the universe and how critical membranes are, like in an ecosystem, in order to keep out enough of the chaos from coming in, so that whatever it is that's forming has a chance to gestate and bloom. And and I love that. It always feels like that.
It feels like the community aspect of it is so important as well.
The community aspect, the context, the process. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yes. Bringing all of it together and being able to be held and guided in that way. Which is why
it's so great you're doing what you're doing and pulling in Drew Dellinger and hopefully Brian Swim and me and Peter Russell and different people talking about this piece, because so often it can feel like, what? Why is it relevant to talk about the universe story, but to really give different voices to what that can look like and how that can support the transformation that we're being forced into is really critical.
Yeah. And when we talk about the universe story, we're talking about what we have come to understand about ourselves through the scientific exploration of who we are.
Yeah.
So it is evolutionary unfolding. 13.7 billion years, the universe being created, Earth, the first single cell, all of it evolving, consciousness, self-awareness, bringing us to this moment and how we are part of this much larger unfolding. And just wanted to kind of clarify that as our modern cosmology. Like, this is the story of our time and how we understand ourselves and our relationship to life. And every culture really throughout time, all different periods of time, had their own unique cosmologies, their way of viewing themselves and answering the questions about what this is all about.
Right. So it's an incredible thing. Now we have the sciences and quantum physics and people like Brian validating and helping us rediscover what our ancestors knew on some level, not from the scientific level that we know it now, but from their experience. And it's this whole piece of really like opening to, we have this shared genetic lineage. First of all, just looking at the amount of division that's in our world in this particular moment, it's crazy. And there's nothing in terms of something that unifies us all, like we're really all from the same stuff. And I feel it palpably every time I even think about this, let alone talk about it, in terms of just thinking about that whole piece that Brian talks about around the universe, life, the planet. We think of the planet as a thing and the universe as a thing. We're in the universe. We live on the planet. And really what starts to shift is to see it as it's an evolutionary event. It's a constant unfolding. So there's been this 14 billion year epic that continues to unfurl through us. And starting with the early universe, Big Bang happens and the heat is so intense for a long time that nothing can even emerge. So then the early particles come forward. We have hydrogen and helium, and they fracture apart and become the stars. And then to just hang out with that whole piece of the stars when they burst apart and when they die, that everything, our bodies, all the carbon and phosphorus and elements that we engage with and that we, are made of, came from the stars. I mean, people can think it's quite poetic that the stars are our ancestors, but to really actually get, that's where we came from.
No, literally. Literally.
And then galaxies, and then 4.5 billion years ago, our Earth, our planet. And that redwoods and oceans and red-tailed hawks and everything that's coming through our bodies and our feelings and emotions, like it's all part of this great unfolding. It's all in flux. And we are life. We're not separate. That is us. And and to take it further, to even think about our bodies, like our livers renew every 14 days. So every 14 days, we essentially get a new liver. Our stomach lining every 3 days. All the cells in our body every 7 years. So to really, where this really hits home for me and where this becomes really a framework for my work and for Ecology Awakening is looking at, we're a noun, we're a thing, we've got a body, but we're much more of a verb. Mm-hmm. We're much more of an unfolding event, constantly evolving and being reshaped and discovering new parts that want to come forward. And that can really change everything, because in the modern industrial story, if we're just a noun, a thing that's living on this inert planet with no meaning other than kind of consumer, it sets us up for chronic seeking. It sets us up from this place of like, we're an empty vessel and we just have to go out there and fill ourselves with experience and love and different skills. And, we'll do that anyway. But this actually reshapes and reframes things of, we're attuned beings that have the opportunity to get more permeable to the conversation that every other being is super engaged with on a moment-to-moment basis. So if you think about like a rabbit, a jackrabbit, right? It's totally dropped into its senses and it's hearing and full body awareness in all moments. If it wasn't, it would be picked off in a nanosecond. So we're the only ones that have the kind of privilege of separating ourselves out and having four walls and sort of not paying attention on that level. And beautiful things have come of it, but it's also separated us from the deep listening that we know how to do, of being part of this bigger conversation.
Absolutely. And recognizing ourselves in the sense of deep time.
Yeah.
How we've unfolded. Yeah. And Brian says something so beautiful. It's something to the effect of, if we wait long enough, we'll see the mountains galloping across the plains.
That's beautiful. I love that. Deep time's so different. Right? Yeah.
And that this idea, it's like, the mountains to crumble down and become the soil, which feeds the carrot, let's say, and then the horse comes and eats the carrot and gallops across the plains. And here it is, like everything is so connected
Yeah.
through this long expansion, this sense of timelessness. And we get so caught up in the moment of the like getting it done now. I mean, like the short-term awareness.
Yeah.
Not the moment is beautiful, but like the short-term awareness of who we are. And we forget that we're part of something so much longer and everlasting and to come too. Like the future ones are in us as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting dance between our particular kind of self-reflective consciousness that, really when we're born, we're just wide open. We come in, I mean, whatever you believe about past lives or separate from that, just there's a very open, receptive being. And then, around age 3 or 4, when we start to develop our sense of self, that kind of separate self, we start to close off everything we are and really take in like who we need to be in order to survive in whatever our particular system was, whoever we were with. And from that place, I lost my train of thought. The place that basically has to start looking at who do I need to be in order to get my basic needs met. So this constant self-reflection. How am I doing? What they think of that? Do I look okay? Do I like that or not like that? And, it's a beautiful part of our process. It's like why we get to do that particular dance, I don't know. But David White has that beautiful line in the poem, we are the one terrible part of creation, privileged to refuse our flowering. So everything else out there, right? Redwoods are just doing their redwood things. Red-tailed hawks are just doing that. Like we have this thing that's stunting in terms of, is it the right time? And should I do it? And so there's nothing wrong with it. It's just recognizing that and actually looking at who are we really and who is this self that we've defined ourselves as being, because it's so much smaller than really everything that encompasses us.
Yeah, it's so true. And isn't it interesting that we've unfolded this way?
Yeah,
Here we are with this ability for the self-reflexive ability that is so fascinating and deepening all the time, our level of awareness and consciousness and understanding that we are the universe reflecting upon itself, like we're getting this right. And yet somewhere along the way we became so obsessed with studying the mechanics of things that we have let go of the intimacy with Earth.
The basic survival needs, right? Like that becomes foremost, and then we can shut everything else off. And then the whole system and everything that shaped us. There's so many layers of what ended up here. One of the things I love thinking about is the whole piece of being a verb and constant unfolding and in relationship and living systems and everything else being tuned into adapting and responding and listening to everything around it. And thinking about a lot of native indigenous languages.
Where it's just verb-based, where there's basically no nouns at all. I was just talking about this with Dr. Michael DeMaria, the same idea of these verbs. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I have to ask you about him. He was an old friend. I haven't seen him for years. So that's that's great. So indigenous language, so that whole piece of like the Hopi language, it's solely, right? It's just like you said, not nouns, but all verbs, unfolding, action, and or relation. So he's actually the one I think of a lot, because when he and I were more in contact, we would just add this ing to the end of our names. Be like, how are you, Michaeling? How are you, Kerry? And it would set something off different in how I was experiencing myself in that moment. So imagining if our languaging was upholding a different view, it's like there's a lot of conditioning that presses us back into the condensed, reified sense of self that we take ourselves to be. So again, what are the different ecologies and people and conversations we're having that help support something that we actually know deep in our being? Like we know this in our bones, but we've been talked out of it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
You were also touching on when we see Earth and all beings, we see Earth in general as a thing and like an inanimate object, versus recognizing Earth as Gaia, like Gaia theory, like living organism, and how that shifts us as well. Like James Lovelock and Lynn Margolis, created
Yes.
the Gaia theory, Gaia hypothesis, which is this idea of Earth as a living organism. And when we look at the systems and how everything is, literally part of a living system, and how we are part of a larger system, when we start to see that, it becomes a thou.
A thou, absolutely. And these kin that we're killing off, and it literally starts to shift your day-to-day movements, just going to the car or going downtown or wherever you're going, to suddenly take in the birds. Or for me, I think it's a never-ending process until I die, that I'll keep opening to what's around to engage with, and this deeper belonging and this wider net of family. It's an incredible, never-ending invitation.
It absolutely is. And in shifting this perception, that's so human-centered, into one that's, biocentric, that has cosmology at its center, because cosmological awareness at its center, and how
Yeah.
it shapes us.
And like we're talking about, it's so beautiful, inviting to talk about. And then when you go right to the level of what that means, like you were talking about earlier, what that presses on us in terms of, it's not an easy shift. We have to let go of an enormous amount of control and shifting so many of the structures. And it really is like a rite of passage that we're going through on a collective level that we can't ignore.
Yeah, let's dive into that. Let's talk about this sort of collective initiation. Like, we're being invited to step through this threshold. We were saying it before. It's like, evolve or die. Like, here it is. We're on the edge.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this moment as a rite of passage.
Yeah. Well, there's so many places to start. First, I would just say, looking at Earth, Earth has these feedback mechanisms. There's a dynamic equilibrium in any living system, in terms of when something gets too extreme, it has to come back into balance. So clearly we're getting massive feedback from the bigger system that we can't keep continuing. And in a way, especially in the last year, it's like looking at everything that's come up into light, even the last 6 months, that have been more in hiding. It's like we're hitting more and more of the threshold of the crisis that it's pressing in us. And really, I mean, looking at just the big power structures and infrastructure and our larger systems, like on that level, that's not as much my expertise, but really looking at all of that needs to shift in terms of the domination and power over. And you look at Black Lives Matter and Spirit, Standing Rock, and just these incredible rising up and waking up, and like the disenfranchised are not taking it any longer, and bringing things back into balance and doing it for the whole. So there's that whole wave that's happening. And then I think about the personal, the place it can hit us all personally, like psychologically, and how we live our day-to-day lives, which is more where my work tends to go around. It's really waking up out of the big lie that we're separate, that we're not nature. Mm-hmm. And the big lie also around the kind of righteousness that we can do whatever we want because it's all about us, and being comfortable and successful is kind of like it. So the level of what it's pressing us into, this kind of, it's not actually about you, honey. Like, it's about the whole. So I think about it as both an awakening from and an awakening to. We're awakening from individualism and independence and conditioning and so much of that sense of we have control and we're kind of top dog,
which is like an obsession in our society.
Yeah, and it just keeps getting fed back by our media and by everything else. And then there's an awakening to everything we've been talking about, the whole Earth community, this sense of interdependence and what's the way of saying it? Like letting life lead the way. How do we actually open ourselves back to the conversation that we knew in our bones, that we've been talked out of? And again, like, it sounds nice. You can say all this of like, oh, interdependence and, moving in a way that life moves through you. But when it really starts to hit you and that shift starts to happen, it can be a lot. And I see it over and over in my work. like in Ecology Awakening, especially with the year-long, people have this year-long process together where it's 4 different retreats coming together and really immersing in all of this, and then going home and kind of how does it work when we're not together and when we're
The space between that. Yes.
exactly.
Definitely. And feeling that disorientation and feeling that like dark night and which way is up and everything I thought and what I don't even know what to think. It might like it's like you're hyper conscious. Your self-awareness becomes magnified, right?
And it presses on, like, we want to get there without having to give up something. And it's just not possible. The level of the privilege and the pieces of control and thinking that, I mean, really going back to the verb noun thing, if we're a noun living in our particular cosmology and story, what we've been taught is, okay, you got to figure out what you want, and then you're going to Z, and so you do ABC to get there. And it's like, it actually flips all of that completely on its head. And if we're really going to move like any living system or any being within a living system, it's moment to moment, adapting, responding, sensing, moving, being moved. And that's lovely when it happens in certain ways, but when you're asked to do it as a way of being in a consistent way, it presses. And I just don't think we can do this work alone. I mean, I see what happens when we come together in community in this little village for Ecology Awakening, whether it's the year long or shorter. But at the same time, when you get the right context and support, the surrendering into that and what actually naturally unfolds, because we are life, we are nature, like there's an organic wisdom of how that wants to happen.
Yeah, I agree. And then in those group settings too, like our language shifts and we get to share in that language together. You know, sometimes even
absolutely
knowing our names and who we are through that,
right.
All of that is, it's, I think it is a crucial element of it. I don't think we can, nor do I think we should be doing it alone.
Yeah, we're not lone wolves.
No, we're not. We're not meant to be. And we deepen and we accelerate and we move so much, you know, in so many more ways when we're in relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, it's important. We need that.
And any rite of passage, as you know, involves an element of death. You don't actually know if you're going to survive. That's what amps up the level of the ordeal or the crisis that opens something up in you. So who knows how far we have to go? We're all watching this unfold on a political, you know, social level, and things are getting really intense. And it seems we're just not willing, and I know this in myself, not even looking out there, but where we have to let go and where we have to sacrifice and where we have to be in the unknown, like all of those levels, it's going to call on everything, but nothing that we've known before. There's a different movement that's not a, like this hubris to figure it out. It's a whole different level of trust.
It is. And I think Standing Rock represents that in a way, in such a powerful way, because it's a prayerful movement.
Yeah.
It's a coming into our love for life, our love for earth, our love for what's holy and sacred and good and right. And, you know, looking deeper into what moves us. So we're not responding with violence, we're responding with an open-armed embrace. That we are all here together. There's no us and them. You know, this is all this. And that is so powerful because that's it. And those of us that are awakening to that are being called into it. You know, in some ways, I think that the whole movement with the Indigenous coming together and with Standing Rock is one of the most powerful movements of our time.
Really, really unbelievable to witness, and just from afar to be part of that from afar, and to witness and to see the everything that you're talking about just rising up from the collective and coming in, and who knows how the structures will respond, but really powerful. And you know, going back to the rites of passage piece, you know, one of the things I try to talk about when people are looking into joining the Ecology Awakening, especially the year-long program, is it's an interesting thing to talk about because there's actually nothing in it for the old self. There's nothing in it for the everyday ego, in terms of it's not about developing a more successful being in the world, you know, like tools to become a better leader or whatever. Like that's really important. Having a better, healthier, functioning sense of self,
Mm-hmm.
super important phase of the work. What I think about in terms of this process that we're talking about is literally like a reshaping.
Mm.
And from that place of losing our center, you're actually losing our center. We're not building a new one, but letting go of our self-referencing constantly and opening so that life can come through. It's more of a reshaping, and you can't know what it's going to look like on the other side. But you get little hits, right? You get little intuitions,
Right.
and and then you start to get a feel for how life wants to move in this different way. And that it's a very, I think that's really unique and individual for each one of us, but it's very body centered. There's a somatic piece where your being gets to be more of a tuning fork in terms of dropping back into the senses. And how does life speak to us? What is intuition anyway? What is an organic impulse? You know, those things that we've lost our
Mm.
sense of, but it's in us. But we just need to have the sort of muscle memory of bringing that back.
What's coming to me is Nat Han was asked what we most need to do to save the world, and he said what we most need to do is to hear within us the sound of the earth.
Mm, mm,
And there's
absolutely.
this invitation now. It's like it is about deep listening
Mm-hmm.
on so many levels. It really is about coming into a silent space and not continuing to move on automatic. I mean, it just keeps coming up, but it is this, not continuing to move on in automatic, but to really deeply reflect on what is true for us.
Absolutely. And how do we start to open ourselves to what it's like to be evoked by a dragonfly or the wind, or, you know, like we know what it's like when to be evoked by other people, just what relationships do to us. Like a slightly different facet comes out with you or with my sweetie or with whoever we're talking about. And we know that feeling, but what's it like to just extend that ability and sensing part of ourselves into everything. And we all know what it's like when we just have a deep gut feeling. And some people will sort of, you know, it's easy to deny and make intuition all sound very out there, but it's a human deep core part of who we are. And it's about reclaiming that back. And this isn't out. I don't even use the word spiritual anymore because I don't even like to put it out in that term. It's like we are one being of many on the system, and life is informing every other being on the planet is involved in this conversation. So how do we open the door and discover what our way is? For some people, it might be more through dreams. For other people, going on walks and being, you know, taken by an oak tree. For other people, listening meditation, or, you know, there's all these different doors. So what works for you and what works for someone else? And there's no one path. For me,
Yeah.
I'm working more with people who are kind of not so much looking for a do ABC to get where you want to go, but are in this place of recognizing there's a really unique way that life wants to speak through you. And how do you find your way to that? How do you open to that?
Yeah. And feeling into recognizing the language beyond words.
Yeah.
Because there is a magic in that. You know, I worked in Big Cypress, the national park here in South Florida for a while. And each night I would go on a solo hike, watch the sunset, you know, just be by myself present, you know, listening. And a hawk would come, and, you know, so many visitors. And there was a language that really opened itself to me, you know, where I got that there's so many ways of communicating,
Mm-hmm.
hearing them and hearing ourselves and being in that incredible dance of life. And it's a recognition of a self and other. It's a recognition of, you know, who and what we are on the deepest level when we open ourselves to that.
And it's opening a whole different brain patterning in your brain. There's a man named John Young, Jon Young.
Yes.
So worked with him some, and he's just beautiful. A tracker for those people that don't know. He was a student of Tom Brown Jr. and has his own school now. And really, one of the big pieces he's opened up for me is bird language, really this whole language that birds are using that every other being is tuning into, around being kind of motion detectors in the forest. And I think it was him that talked at one point about studies that they had done, scientists had done on some native people's brains, literally, that were living in more of a nature-based culture, and just the much bigger part of their brain that they were tapping into by being so dropped into their senses and not always just having the focused mind, like actually opening peripheral vision. And where do we actually listen from? It's not just our ears. So yeah, it's opening the capacities that, again, are in us, but we've been talked out of.
Yes, and with brain elasticity, we can still grow those parts of our brain. Like it's not like, okay, we've been shaped and this is our architecture and that's it. But no, we have the ability to continue expanding these different parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
And it means a daily practice. It means living that.
Absolutely.
And, I think about too, like, so many, I'm thinking about, well, as we come into the world in the Western culture, we're really deprived of that experience in so many ways. Whereas in indigenous cultures, like I'm thinking of the Iroquois and how they have this Thanksgiving prayer of giving thanks to everything, or some other indigenous cultures that, like when the baby is born, that infant is, they introduce them to the sun and the moon and the stars. And like, there is this communion that happens at birth, and they're brought up into that. And here in our Western culture, we're really deprived of that. I remember I worked also as an adjunct professor at FIU, and I would bring students to the Everglades. And I can't tell you how many times that we'd be out there and people would freak out. What's that sound? And it's literally the wind blowing, and they're going, and they have this fear about being in wild spaces because it seems so foreign, and they were brought up going, no, don't touch that. No, that's dirty. No, you don't want to run outside. No, that's dangerous. Like fear about wildness.
Which is totally understandable, right? Yeah, so it's both working with that fear side, and that's where the somatic experience and the trauma work comes in for me. Is like, how do we work with our nervous system and biology and our physiology, and open up our capacity to let more and more of life in, more and more of the unknown, and to support and kind of smooth out our overwhelm. It's great for trauma and PTSD, but it's to me, it's about life. It's for all of us, in terms of, we can't leave out the body in the whole part of the conversation.
So what kind of things do you do as far as bringing in that somatic experience?
It has become kind of a baseline. It's a way of being, and then there's specific techniques in it. But like in Ecology of Awakening, it will come in whether we're working with dreams or whether people are telling their stories, or at some points, sometimes people's deep conditioning or something that has been locked in them for a long time starts to come out, because that's what wants to move in order to make space for the bigger conversation to move through them. And so we'll use it there in terms of how to support someone in actually being able to kind of ground as something overwhelming is moving through. And ultimately, what I think about is teaching people the basic practices of resourcing and tracking in their body, and some of the basic tools that come out of that system, in order to build the capacity to open up to mass extinction, to the, not only the threat of what's coming, but what's here. So it really, again, it's about trauma, but I think of the resiliency side in terms of the building the capacity to open more and more to become a house for the universe. Literally, if you come back to Brian's powers, which I know that piece of, if this isn't just, I don't always remember this when I'm in a hard moment. I don't want what's happening to be happening. But ultimately, when I can remember, right, my biggest prayer is to be here, and to let whatever it is that wants to move through, and to be used in a way that's part of something that supports life. And in order to do that, you're going to confront places that you don't necessarily like, deep anxieties or whatever it is. So to me, I think of SE and those tools that I just call living resiliency at this point, as a support to help us kind of like, oh, whoa, this is kind of new and something big's moving through. And then it's like, wow, like who do we discover ourselves to be when that expresses through? And so I mean, to me, it's a never ending process, project, practice, imitation of, we're never going to stop unfolding if we can support that process in continuing.
So beautifully said. So maybe we could have an experience of
Yeah, I'd love to take people on one, and really it's more of like a thought process kind of experience around deep time and
beautiful.
time and rhythm. So you're welcome to keep looking at the screen, but if you want, whoever's watching, you can also close your eyes and just kind of following along with what happens in your body and your breath and your awareness, just as we think about some of these things. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about a baby being, brought into the world in nature-based culture, and thinking about our ancestors. Like if you track back our parents and grandparents and keep going back, for all of us, there's some nature-based culture that we came from. So if you imagine that, not imagining, but just really thinking about the fact that our ancestors lived in a very, very different world than what we live in. There was this way that they were alive and in tune and listening to everything around them that was, they had to be. It's like there was no false dichotomy between inside and outside. They had to adapt and live in alignment with the larger forces, or they wouldn't make it. So you can glorify it, but just to think about the place that one of my somatic experiencing teachers actually used to take us through this little thought process around. His name is Steve Hoskinson, and he would talk about our biology being actually from a very different time. So if you imagine your whole life up till last night was growing up in some sort of nature-based culture. Typically, it's somewhere between 20 and 120 people maximum. So 120 maximum is the amount that would be in your village. So you're in that kind of context, you're typically waking up with the first dawn chorus, the birds in the morning, the first light. You're going about your day. Again, this isn't glorifying and saying there wasn't hardship in terms of what they're confronting. You're going to bed at night. Maybe there's a fire going, there's some storytelling, but you don't have these bright lights keeping you up. When you're drinking something like this glass of water, you'd be drinking something out of a vessel that you know likely who made it and where the earth came from. So just imagining what your body is attuned to in that environment and what you are aware of, and being in your senses, again, that you have to be. And the fastest you would ever go in that kind of scenario is the fastest that your body could run. So that's the fastest that your body would move. So again, not excluding any hardship or hunting or just like everything that came with living in that way of life, but just imagining that what the rhythm would be like in terms of you were completely dependent on the cycles and rhythms and seasons outwardly and inwardly of what's going on in your body and what's happening out in the world. So your whole life up till last night was in that scenario. And then you imagine that you wake up in the middle of modern industrial culture, where we stay up till the wee hours. We have fluorescent lights a lot of times around us. We have 4 walls that we generally live in. We're careening down the highway at 60, 70 miles an hour. Nowadays, we're on computer and, like iPhone, and just computer games is just beyond whatever we've each gone through personally. The level of what our nervous systems are trying to adapt to is crazy. Like our nervous systems are completely whacked. And what I think about in that kind of imagining that, and we'll go to a part 2, more invoking deep time, is you can't hear from that place. I think you were mentioning this earlier. It's like, how can life break in and speak to you if we're charging along constantly on our, whatever, mobile phones, and just moving at such a fast pace where we've actually been, it's kind of terrifying for some people to stop or just to go into silence. So the whole piece of, the shift that needs to happen in terms of being able to slow down enough so that that kind of listening can happen is a really interesting one. But just thinking on a basic kind of nervous system level, Larry Dossey is a doctor who wrote a bunch of books, and he actually coined this term called hurry sickness. And hurry sickness, like this, the outcome of hurry sickness would be higher blood pressure and heart disease and depression. And he actually literally had studies done about this. So you think about our sense of time used to be measured by the seasons and the cycles. And now it's by, this technology that we're talking on, which is an amazing gift. But if that's the only thing that we're tuned into and that becomes our ecology, that's how we're navigating and that we're not navigating. So just going through that, and then the other part is really thinking about deep time. And for me, this is the piece that really invites something else around having a felt sense of the incredibly deep and innate intelligence that is around us, within us, that's guiding us, that has been guiding us all along. And there's a woman named Dana Baumeister who's a biomimicry teacher, and she gave a talk at the Bioneers Conference a few years ago, and it stuck with me, and I convey it all the time, and I want to pass it on to you. So she'll tell, basically it's to convey just how new we are on the scene and how many elders are here to turn to. So she'll talk about the age of the Earth. So 4.5 billion years ago, Earth was born. So if Earth was born on January 1st, she puts it in the framework of a year. And just before midnight on December 31st is when we arrive. So the way it unfolds is birth is born January 1st. Life doesn't even show up in terms of earliest primordial soup and earliest bacteria till February 25th. So February 25th, life emerges. March is when photosynthesis happens. So massive shift in the universe, right? Life figures out how to capture carbon dioxide and spew out oxygen. So if you didn't know how to deal with oxygen, if you were an organism that had never encountered that before, which is pretty much everything, you either got snuffed out or you went deep under the oceans into a totally anaerobic situation and adapted there, or you figured out how to breathe in and utilize oxygen. So huge shift that happened at that point. That's March. Then April through all of August, the entire time, the only thing that's happening is single cell organisms. So single cell organisms happening that whole time. And then September 17th was a big day. September 17th is when sex happened. So life figured out how to replicate, and then all these things come on board. So November is the mushrooms, the fish, and the land plants. All these different organisms come on board, right? Mushrooms, fish, land plants. December is reptiles, mammals, and birds. So life is just can't stop creating. All these different forms are coming forth. December 20th is when flowers emerge. So flowers emerge, that's 11 days ago. That's only 11 days ago that flowers emerge. Then it starts to get kind of trippy. So December 25th, Christmas Day, is when the dinosaurs went extinct. In years, it's 65 million years ago. That was 6 days ago. So that's crazy. How long does that feel like when we actually talk about when that happened? December 31st at 11:30 a.m. is when our ancestors, the hominids, started emerging. That's 11 and a half hours ago. And then December 31st at 11:36 p.m., we arrive. So that's 24 minutes ago. So we're 24 minutes old. And the real kicker is that if you take the entire agricultural revolution, last 10,000 years, guess how old that is?
Second.
1 second.
1 second.
1 second old. So the entire agricultural revolution, everything that's come out, modern industrial culture, it is so new. We are so young. We so don't know what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we have the hubris to think we actually have a greater intelligence from the entire matrix that birthed us. So what that does for me is just really feeling into when you go through that larger dimension of time, there's the possibility that can really shift fear of what is happening to a sense of awe.
Yes.
We're a part of this incredible story. It keeps unfolding, and it looks like we're entering the new chapter. I don't know how long ago, but the Anthropocene, like how do we leave that behind? And actually, there's a huge invitation to me to everything you've been talking about. And I forget as much as any other person, but what are the reminders that help us engage and listen and respond from a new place and find our role of what wants to happen? Because it's an amazing event, it's an amazing story, and it continues. And this entire web of life, 14 billion years ago, 14 billion years and 4.5 billion years of the earth unfolding, like it's there supporting us. We actually don't need to figure this out. We can't figure it out, but we need to get past our hubris and do a whole different level of humility and surrendering and listening and discovering a new way.
And I think that brings us back to the allowing life to present itself through us.
Yeah.
And breaking down those stories, breaking down these attachment to the ideas and this paradigm that we're holding on, like it's like we're holding on for dear life, but it's like, murder and suicide. We're on that train and we don't quite get it, but we know it's like we know the story. We know there's something more. We have this information and we're learning more every day, but we're not quite living it.
Yeah.
It's so embedded in our behaviors and our educational system, in the way that we're brought into the world, that it is just like waking up out of this, like you said, what'd you call it? The great lie, or like this
The big lie. Yeah.
Or, it's allowing ourselves to wake up and trust that awakening, to trust in that and find the community that supports it, to be able to speak in this language that empowers us to move forward with this understanding. That is so the crucial element.
And here are you and I sitting here talking on our computers. We have a roof over our head and lights. And, we have a certain privilege and capacity to engage and do this kind of thinking. Other people have no idea where their next meal is coming from, or don't have the time or privilege to even think about these things. And to me, it's even more responsibility of like, we have this information out there. How do we continue to spread it? And have those of us that have the time engage with it and break down the systems that need to be broken down so that something new can happen, so that the whole can be included. I mean, it's different people are engaging in different ways, and it's not going to look the same for everyone. And a lot of it depends on, what our particular moment is about in terms of capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking about, Brian Swim's Powers of the Universe too, like the idea of cataclysm.
Yeah.
In this right now, and we have to allow what needs to die.
Right.
Go. It's okay. Because these new things are going to emerge. The creativity of the universe is on our side. If we just allow ourselves to come into that space and creatively emerge, respond creatively.
Yeah.
So powerful, Kerry. All of us.
And how do we support each other in that process, right? Again, we can't do it alone, and it's a vulnerable thing. It's going to call on a lot of what we're used to counting on, or not even counting on, but a lot of our assumptions and beliefs and patterns, and I mean, all of it comes into question.
Right, and we get to be willing to let it go.
My, little short-lived life at 52 years of. It's been many years of engaging with this, and I look back and I see my own points where I was just crossing my arms like, no way. And yet something in me, like some kind of grace, some kind of longing, some kind of intention, something kept breaking through. And I had the support and resources to actually engage with some of it and do some big leaps. But I see what it took in my own life to kind of let go of the reins, and I continue to go through that process. And
Me too.
I really get why we're in this system of this much crisis of really not being willing to see, because I grew up in more of a worldview, the worldview we're talking about, and if you don't know the other, why would you do anything different?
Yeah, and it is an ongoing conversation. I'm trying to think of this Rumi poem right now with something like, I'm totally going to paraphrase it, but it's like, it starts with, um, the wind at dawn has secrets to tell you.
The breeze at dawn.
The breeze at dawn has secrets
Yeah.
to tell you. Don't go back to sleep.
Don't go back to sleep.
Don't go back to sleep.
Yeah.
This is it. Everybody who's here with us right now, we're here. We're awakened. We're listening. We're aware of all of this. Do not go back to sleep.
And in my experience, the awakening moments don't necessarily last. It's not the way the process works. There'll be a moment of clarity and arriving and getting it and inspiration anew, and then it'll collapse back down. And it can often feel like I did something wrong, or shoot, I'm not on the right path. But to really actually look at, first off, everything in life moves that way. Everything from the cosmos in here is in a constant expansion, contraction, right? And it's every moment something wakes up out of the old story and has a glimpse, or has a view that isn't caught in our own identity. It will go back and it wants to touch anything in us that's still frozen or locked away. And so in that moment, when we're in the next, like, oh, I thought I got beyond this, it's so tempting to think there's something wrong in that moment, or to try to get back to the other moment that you were in. But that other Rumi poem, The Guest House, comes.
Yeah.
Oh,
wow, that just keeps coming up.
Right? How do we actually welcome that and see that is the next door? There's a deep intelligence of life in terms of what's coming up within us, what's happening in our lives. Like, in one way, everything that's going on is a reflection of what's happening in here. So how do we keep turning right here and not looking outside for what of course we're going to do actions and respond with what we're moved to do, but we can't leave out here.
It has to begin there.
And it's not always an up and out, more compassionate, just easier and easier path. It can get harder when we're getting more and more peeling away the layers of our conditioning and getting to the core places of survival. There's a deep grip in there. And
I would even say it will get harder. Like, just
exactly.
It will not be easy.
Yeah.
It will not be easy, and you will not know what will happen, and you will be stepping into uncertainty, and you will be letting go of things that seem comfortable. It will dislodge so much and leave us kind of floating in this question.
And there are those that have gone through the process and continue to, and there is support. But I think the context for what's happening, and not in the hard moments, not thinking that something wrong, that you're kind of off the river. That it's both an emerging and what's arriving, and a shedding and a falling away. So how do we continue to support both processes?
Yeah, absolutely. The great unraveling and the great turning happening.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, it is. Well, I know you have a poem also.
I do have a poem, and I think just one other piece before that is just I know we're towards the end of. For me, and again, this is such an invitation for other people to feel into what's right for them. But for me, there's kind of a 3-prong process of, first, there has to be some way, in order for this bigger conversation to happen, there has to be some way that we just stop and disconnect from the busyness, disconnect from form, from relationships and structures and commitments and all the things that make up our lives that are so beautiful. Part of the modern industrial story that we're dancing with is anything that's in the invisible realm, like feelings and intuition and energy, is just denied. So how do we actually stop and take a moment from all the things we're engaged with and drop into our deeper awareness, our deeper essence, who we are? Call it God, spirit, emptiness, whatever it is. And from that silent space, just come back to our own rhythm, and also let life inform us from that place.
Mm.
People often think like, oh, well, if I take time and do that, it's like nothing will happen. And I think there's this panic of passivity. And then it comes into question to weave everything we've been talking about back. Is like, really? Like 14 billion years has been unfolding and it's constantly in flux. Like there's actually a fecund movement in the silence, but there has to be a willingness in some way to stop. And I know you were going to mention it later, but a listening meditation is something that I've offered as part of the free gift. And
Yes.
that's one way that for me is a really beautiful invitation into, on the one hand, stopping and getting more of a felt sense of how our deeper awareness, separate from our mind, moves and just does its thing, whether it drops into silence or moves from sound to sound. And so just an invitation for people to find their own way of, whether it's yoga or getting up early in the morning, just some way of stopping. And then the second thing, just briefly, is in some way connecting with the larger earth community, life, nature. And for me, birds and bird language and just becoming a part of that family is a big one. But going out on walks, befriending plants in your house, I mean, whatever it might be, some way of beginning to open to the eco-literacy and the conversation that's waiting. And from that, the third one is action. Like our response and our action comes out of that place. It's like we can't keep looking to ourselves and our minds to figure it out. So what are the ways that we each engage with things, like you were saying, on a daily basis, regular basis, in some way to support the breaking down, but also the listening and the where does inspiration really come from?
Yeah, and that's also an invitation to find those places where you feel most alive.
Yeah.
What really calls to you, because that's the only way we should be living our lives. I mean,
Yeah.
There are things that we might do that aren't necessarily that in every single moment, but
Absolutely.
what we need to be doing when we look back at our lives, we need to be feeling that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a dance, form and formless, and how do we keep both ends?
Mm-hmm. It is.
So I do have a poem, and I love this poem that I found a few years ago because I translated into what it's really saying. But so much of our conversation has been how do we open ourselves and awaken to life speaking to us? How does that work? What are the ways that it happens? And most often we're just looking the wrong direction. Like it's actually like a flower coming up through concrete. It's constantly whispering. We just don't remember how to do that. So this is a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye called Missing the Boat. And it somewhat speaks to this to me. It is not so much that the boat passed and you failed to notice it. It's more like the boat stopping directly outside your bedroom window, the captain blowing the signal horn, the band playing a rousing march. The boat shouted, waving bright flags, its silver hull blinding in the sunlight. But you had this idea you were going by train. You kept checking the timetable, digging for tracks, and the boat got tired of you. So tired it pulled up the anchor and raised the ramp. The boat bobbed into the distance, shrinking like a toy, at which point you probably realized you had always loved the sea. And I think in all of us, there is that deep longing, right? That deep call. And it can turn really quick into depression and kind of meaninglessness. But when we really get quiet, there is that pull. And how do we get quiet enough to hear that and have it follow where it's pulling us in here and also out to life in a different kind of engagement? Because life really is always shouting. We've just forgotten and been talked out of it. And I'm continuing to deepen into that conversation as much as everyone.
That's what this is all about. This
Absolutely.
is all about deepening into that conversation and all the ways that we need to be having it, And it makes me think of the hero journey too. It's like that day where it comes and that calling comes. It might be a whisper. It might be the gentle caress of a leaf on your skin, or it's just going to be this like shattering, totally like break it all open, house burning down, literally, like burning down the house on every level. It's coming, it's calling to you right now, to all of us, and we just need to listen.
And we don't need to wait for the personal crisis or the collective crisis to be in that conversation. We often do, but there's a way to engage with it where we're not waiting for it to just completely shred us first.
But if you are waiting for it, the moment is now. Because it's happening, right? The shedding is happening. It is upon us. We are in the collective crisis. This is the moment.
Yeah.
This is the moment. Don't, the boat's going to pick up its anchor. So
it's the next chapter in our evolutionary history. So how are we gonna respond? Yeah.
And that's a great question to leave us all with, isn't it? How are we going to respond? We all need to ask ourselves that question.
Yeah. Thank you, Val.
Kerry, thank you so much. And as you mentioned, you have this listening meditation. So everybody, please click on that link. It'll take you to Kerry's site. You'll get to have that beautiful meditation and explore her work.
And if any of you are drawn, we're starting our next year-long journey for Ecology Awakening in March, at the end of March. We're taking applications. It's pretty quickly filling. So if you have any interest, email me, call me, read the website, read the invitation. But it's a year-long journey, 4 different retreats and 4 different ecosystems and things in between, of really how do we engage with everything we've been talking about, not just intellectually, but really have it shift how we move through the world. And it's my greatest love to do that work. So I'd love to have any of you join me.
Awesome, Kerry. And I can speak from experience, not necessarily with you, but in that year-long, similar type of journey with Bill, it is so rich and so powerful. And it really stays with you, even when we're continue the dance.
Yeah.
It is so deepening. So definitely check it out.
Beautiful.
Thank you for your beautiful work and just the way that you honor your own calling in this world.
Absolutely. Thank you for all you're putting together for all of us.
We need it.
All right.
All right. Have a beautiful day.
Take care.